Hello, everybody, and welcome into the Dynasty Roundtable podcast. Whether you're watching on YouTube, whether you're listening on the podcast, we thank you for watching. If you are watching on the YouTube channel, do us a favor, click the like button, subscribe to the channel if you like this content. And today, we are going to be talking about sleepers that you need to target in your Dynasty leagues. These players we think could make an impact on your team this year. And we corrected course from last episode. We defined what a sleeper is, and everybody has a different definition of what a sleeper is, right? In Dynasty and fantasy football. And I'm sure the range of outcomes with that is all over the place. But our definition, and you let us know what your definition is in the comments, in the whatever on podcasts. Leave us a comment or a review of what your definition of a sleeper is. Our definition of a sleeper in Dynasty Fantasy Football, since this is what this channel is dedicated to, is a player taken in round 10 or later of a Dynasty startup, and we are using Dynasty Data Labs ADP tool to measure that, Superflex. And it's also a player that's 25 years or younger. So a player that has some upside, not just this year, but, in Dynasty further on down the road. So Matt Babich, I have to ask you, you approve, we went back and forth on this definition. I threw it to you. You said it sounded good. How are you thinking and feeling about it right now? And how was this process for you picking out these players, these sleepers that we're going to talk about tonight?
Yeah. So you presented me your definition, and my only really response was we could play around with the round barrier, because I did think there were some really good players in round 10 where maybe they're not true sleepers. And again, that's where it starts getting into very opinion-based things. So I said, it's not worth our time debating whether we make the round cutoff at 11 or 12. Let's make it 10. And inherently, we don't plan on doing these things, but you went later, so round 10 didn't even matter for you. And I went a little shallower for the most part. I tried to kind of continue to go down. I started in round 10 and just, picked out some names as I was going down. So I tried to get a few rounds involved, but it was so easy for me. I mean, it was so easy. I could have written, I don't know about you, I could have written down 20 to 25 players probably with write-ups and speeches prepared for all of them, because you start at round 10, you go down that board, there's a lot of promise on the board. It's a perfect situation even to potentially trade back in startups and acquire picks that are later that draft, because a lot of drafters are going to be willing to try and throw those picks away first, believe it or not, before they throw away future rookie picks. So even a few round swap and being able to get some of these sleepers in the 10th round and beyond could prove wonders for your dynasty team. Did you find it as easy as I did to grab lists of sleepers that you really liked? I think the only hard part about it was limiting it to a certain number.
I think the most difficult part for me was I was thinking, okay, because sleeper to me is in between a stash, or it's just above a stash. And so I'm like, okay, how far down am I going to where this player is a stash in Dynasty? And we're going to have a stashes episode coming at you here. In our next episode is going to be a Dynasty stashes episode. So I wanted to save some ammunition for that episode. But I agree with you. I found it relatively easy for me because in my mind, I have a bunch of targets that I like to hit in Dynasty startups and best ball drafts that I'm doing right now. So, and my favorite targets are the players where the shine is off. They're not necessarily a rookie. We're going to talk about some rookies, but my favorite players to target are second year, third year players. Maybe some people have forgotten about these players. Maybe they think, oh, just because they didn't break out in their rookie season, they'll never break out. Those are my favorite targets because I think those players, you can really reap some serious value on those players. So maybe not as easy as it was for me, but Yeah, I found this very enjoyable, and this is one of my favorite processes to go through in the off season is to identify sleepers and stashes, because this is how you can really turn your roster around. If you have a bad roster, just identify some of these players with some serious upside that are being undervalued, target them in trades, or hell, maybe even get them thrown into trades as an extra piece that you can ask for. And on the surface, it's not a big deal, right? But it could turn into a major deal. So I'm going to start with you tonight, Matt Babbage. I'm going to turn the tables on you on the Dynasty Roundtable and let you go first, because I feel like I always go first. So who is your first stash, or not stash? Who is your first sleeper? And I cannot believe that we are talking about this player as a sleeper, but technically he qualifies according to our definition.
He qualifies. I do need to add a caveat. I cheated a little bit because there's a couple of 25.6s in age that I said good enough.
Still 25.
That's
still
25.
Counts.
And quite honestly, as I went through the day, I thought maybe the other player I have as an honorable mention, who I'll get to, was more fitting for this. And maybe Travis Etienne should have been the honorable mention. But I decided to go with Travis Etienne. And here's why. I think we're getting a little carried away and putting the cart before the horse on Bashul Tutin early on in his career. I love him as a prospect. You love him as a prospect. But this was always an interesting situation for him to enter. And I was okay with the cost of Tutin, where it was baked into where Etienne was probably going to be the lead dog again for another season. Mix in a little Bigsby, mix in a little Tutin, maybe 5% outlier case Tutin takes over the backfield, or at least a large share. Now, it's starting to shift where it seems like Etienne is almost being cast out and saying, he's done. I think there's still enough perception of him being a starter as of now to maintain his value near RB30. But if Tutin starts practice with the first team offense for whatever reason, and that news cycle starts spinning, Etienne might lose another round in ADP. And we just need to take a step back and remember that this is the only running back on this roster who has proved to be an efficient pass catcher so far in his career. We look back to the start of his career at 2022. He had 1.29 yards per route run, finished 16th among running backs, and increased that year over year. 1.42 last year and 1.42 in 2023. And then last year, 1.46, a career high. He also was breaking tackles and generating yards better than anyone in this backfield. And he also increased his total there in yards created per touch in 3 straight seasons. So we're looking at a back who has had a little bit of trouble with rushing efficiency on paper. Now we know that, especially if you have a bad offensive line, if you're forced to constantly create yards, if you're playing through lower body injuries, in this case, a mix of all three for Travis Etienne, alongside a horrible coaching staff that didn't really have much faith in him, it's hard to be efficient on a rushing basis. It's much easier to be efficient on a pass catching basis, because that's more talent and scheme and less O-line dependent than the running game. If you're getting hit behind the line of scrimmage a lot, your life's going to be tough. And so Etienne has this opportunity now in front of a new regime, in front of a slightly improved offensive line. He has the chance to get into the good graces of this coaching staff, and particularly Liam Cohen, who we saw how he deployed Bucky Irving last year. If he has a guy in this backfield, he's going to push that guy the ball. And let's think even worst case scenario, right? What if he is Rashad White? What if this is just Bucky Irving and Rashad White all over again? Well, Rashad White finished as like the RB 26 in fantasy points per game. Really only had 3 games where it was like, oh, this is bad. And they would just so happen to be the fantasy playoffs where White wasn't performing very well, and they went with the hot hand in Irving. So they rode a split share for much of that season. Okay, if that happens, Etienne's still viable at RB 30. Not a slam dunk at value, but you're breaking even. And then the sky's the limit from there on out. I truly don't see a world where Etienne takes a full backseat to this backfield. meaning he's going to be getting a lot of important touches. And I think pass blocking is going to be huge there. Tootin has already been criticized for his pass blocking ability, and the connection with Trevor Lawrence is still there in what's a very pivotal year. Plus, it was 4th round capital. To me, that has always seemed like, all right, well, if Tootin hits, he hits. If not, we'll try next year. We're not going to re-sign Travis. It's an insurance option for Travis Etienne. They want this kid to work. They want Trevor Lawrence's college teammate to work. I promise you. And so I'm buying in on Travis Etienne. My honorable mention is DeAndre Swift. Similar situation, except probably a better history of on-paper efficiency and production in both the rushing game and the passing game, and goes into a Ben Johnson offense. So I think both of these players have similar reasons why I'm promoting them at their value. And admittedly, I honestly think Swift might be the better call, but we go with Etienne on the board.
I really like both of these picks right off the bat. Travis Etienne, we were told this is a really good running back class, and I believe that it was. And you nailed it. Round 4, if you have such a concern with your running back room, like the Cleveland Browns did, for example, the Cleveland Browns told us, we do not trust Jerome Ford whatsoever. We are taking Quinshon Judkins, and we're going to take Dylan Sampson in round 4 to make sure we're covered, because we could not run the ball the way we wanted to last year. And that's evidenced by the fact that they ran the 28th most rush attempts per game last year. The previous 2 seasons, they were in the top 5. The Jaguars, this is we'll take the best player on the board, but we're not super concerned about our backfield. And then throw in the fact that Etienne's in a contract year too, so he's going to be super motivated. You talked about the shower narrative with Trevor Lawrence, and the fact that he's going in round 10 of Dynasty startups, and he's going super late in best ball drafts too, is I think that this is a smash. And I think DeAndre Swift, same story. The Bears supposedly were interested in Travion Henderson. Didn't happen. And they just kept taking value in the draft, with Luther Burden and Colston Loveland, their first 2 picks, and then offensive lineman, defensive lineman. And then all of a sudden, round 7 is when they take a running back, and Roschon Johnson was horrible last year. So, and they increased and they improved their offensive line. So we could keep going and going with this, but I really like those 2 calls, because these are two guys that are, I think, clearly the favorite. It might not be an obvious favorite. I think in the case of DeAndre Swift, it is. I think he's the obvious favorite to win the job. And because of that, no matter how we feel, no matter how much taint or stank that these players have on them, they're going to be valuable for our fantasy teams. And speaking of a player that I think kind of got a raw deal last year, was Tyjae Spears. And that's going to be my first pick here. And last year, he had a lot of injuries. He had 4 injuries, to be exact. Ankle sprain, hamstring strain, where he missed 3 games because of that. And then he had 2 concussions, which isn't great. And he missed a game for each one of those. But when you look at his 2023 season, in terms of efficiency, it was a lot better. And he was number 9 amongst running backs in targets that season with 70 on a 52.9% snap share. And oh, by the way, do you remember who the running back was in 2023 for the Tennessee Titans? His name's Derrick Henry. So they, with Mike Vrabel as coach, so they trusted a rookie in Tyjae Spears to basically split time with Derrick Henry, probably to keep him fresh for the playoffs. But still, that's pretty darn impressive. I've always liked the prospect. I thought he was really good coming out of school. And now the offense should be much better this year with Cam Ward at quarterback, as opposed to the mayonnaise drinking Will Levis, wherever I think he might actually still be with the Titans. But
yeah.
The offense is you can't tell me that Cam Ward is not an upgrade here. And Tony Pollard didn't exactly flash last year when he was given the majority of the snaps. So the running back with the most juice on this team might actually be Tyjae Spears. He's just 24 years old. You can grab him. I had his ADP is 142 on Dynasty Data Lab. I think that's round 12 or 13, somewhere in that neighborhood. And actually, yeah, round 12. He's going right after Jaylen Warren, just for context. And I think in that range, that's a running back. Not only am I targeting him in Dynasty, but that's one of the handcuffs that I really like, because I think that offense is going to be so much better this year. But what are your thoughts on Tyjae Spears?
I like Spears a lot. I like both Titans backfield members just for the volume uptick alone and being, a better offense. And you look through their game logs when at least one of them is getting touches. There was injuries on Tyjae's side that made it a little bit difficult to start judging games when they're both involved. But Pollard's playing really well. Spears is playing really well towards the end of the season. And ideally, they get both of these backs pretty involved. You have Pollard a little bit on the smaller side and Spears a little bit on the smaller side. Both have some injury history with lower legs. So what's better than getting them both involved, especially when you look at the weapons around Cam Ward? There's not a lot. So why not lean into the strength that you have in your backfield? So I love the talent with Spears, and I love the discount that we're getting, which is interesting because you would think after the end of last season, going into this season, his value would have increased, but it doesn't. It hasn't really.
Yeah, and we've talked about this next player before, but I'm going to shoot it to you for your next guy, and it's going to be Trey Benson. So let's talk about Trey Benson.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick here. I didn't even realize when I was going through this last night that Benson was on the. I just saw his name, and he's such a smash value in my mind that I just defaulted. I was like, yeah, Trey Benson. And then as I was putting the show notes together, I was like, well, I don't really need to do a write-up because I just talked about it a couple days ago when we recorded our last our breakouts video. So I'll keep it a little shorter. If you want the full rant, you can go and check out that breakouts video. Is a great video, so do check it out. James Conner, 30 years old, averaging just under 18 touches per game across the last 7 seasons. That can only go on for so much longer. I'll add this new bit that I saw today from Sumer Sports. The Cardinals were 6th in offensive success rate last season. It's kind of a shocking stat when you think about it, because Kyler and the struggles with Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride not getting into the end zone just really seemed like this offense wasn't clicking, but it was moving pretty well for the majority of the season. And now, how do we keep that going with a 30-year-old James Conner who's taken a ton of mileage over his career and had a scare with a knee and an ankle last year? It didn't turn out to be anything, but 2 separate incidents where he almost got a knee injury and an ankle injury. Now, Trey Benson, rookie season, not much to note there, but when you look at the metrics between Conner and Benson in terms of true yards per carry, his yards per touch, his yards per route run, and his juke rate, evaded tackles per touch, they're all very similar to James Conner in terms of him being a performant rusher. He was the RB 24 and 22 in fantasy points in weeks 9 and 10 with James Conner on the field. And that's the type of shift that I'm expecting. Getting Benson more involved, closer to a 60-40 split, where Benson, with efficiency in this offense, if they maintain their success rate, could overperform and become a borderline RB2 if we do have some sort of a dual-headed monster here, because Arizona is very clearly dependent on the run game. And if they're going to lean into that and give Trey Benson some more of that work, he has that in his range of outcomes to overperform his expected output with efficiency and become a top 24 RB or near that in fantasy points per game. So getting a young back at this price, really all because he did what we should have expected him to do all along, and that's ride the coattails of James Conner in his rookie year. I mean, just clap it up if you can get that value.
Yeah, and just to add on, I think it's notable that they did nothing to add to their running back room, which tells me that they're fine with Trey Benson as their backup. And then it's one of the more clear handcuff situations in the NFL with upside, which is why I think he's such a value where he's going. And I think he's very clearly the heir apparent. And I think it's worth mentioning too, and you said it, last season was the first season where James Conner basically played a full season. Like the previous 2 years, he missed 4 games each. And so like I don't think that's nothing. And this is a running back too that touched the ball not quite 300 times last year, but it was close. So again, they can't keep doing that. They want to keep him healthy. They're going to have to get Trey Benson more involved. So I love that call out. My next player is Blake Corum, and pure and simple, this is a contingent upside play because we all know that Sean McVay is a crazy person. He should have been born he should have coached football in 1985 because the way he uses Kyren Williams is insane. Like Kyren Williams last season ranked number 1 amongst running backs in snap share at 88.4%. And because of that, he ranked number 1 in red zone touches amongst running backs with 77. He did the same thing with Kyren Williams in 2023. Kyren Williams ranked number 1 in snap share at 83.9%, number 4 in red zone touches. And while Kyren Williams and the Rams running backs don't really catch passes out of the backfield, you can't ignore that volume. And so I understand they added Jarquez Hunter. I drafted Jarquez Hunter in a lot of my rookie drafts super late because there is a chance that maybe potentially he usurps Blake Corum. I wouldn't buy into that this year in his rookie season. Blake Corum, and they also waited until round 4 to take him too. So it's another situation like with Bashul Tutin where if you thought, wow, there's a real problem here, you think you would have thought they would have addressed it sooner. But if anything happens to Kyren Williams, and the season before last, he missed some time. So if anything happens to him, you would think that Sean McVay's first impulse and instinct is going to be, okay, Blake Corum, you're going to be out there, maybe not for 88% of the snaps, but maybe 70% of the snaps, getting all those red zone touches, because we know that offense is going to be able to move the ball with Devontae Adams, Puka Nacua, Matthew Stafford. So and I'll say this too, if you're a win now team with Kyren Williams, and it's going to be really tough to trade him. I know Kyren Williams is on our sell list, and we've talked about that in previous videos, or at least he's on my sell list. And I think Matt agrees. You can tell me if you don't, but like if you have Kyren Williams and you don't want to trade him, you have to acquire Blake Corum. Like you have to find a way to get Blake Corum on your roster as a handcuff, because the upside there, especially if you're a win now team, is just too tantalizing to ignore, in my opinion. And the cost is so cheap. Now that team is likely going to know what you're up to, so they may try to raise the price on you. So I wouldn't go too crazy up, to pay up. But if you're asking me, would I give up a 3rd round rookie pick or whatever? I mean, if I just go to Dynasty Data Lab right now and look up where Blake Corum is going, like pick a player near there and maybe go up around, I would still, I would still be into that. So what are your thoughts on Blake Corum?
I'm basically pro all of these year 2 running backs that disappointed in year 1, not because of talent, but because they were going to an incumbent starter that people kind of overreacted to in a given situation. And the recency bias of it all and the short attention span of dynasty gamers really, really, really intrigues me. I mean, we had this tunnel vision on Blake Corum ever since he was drafted in the 2nd round to the Los Angeles Rams. And we said, oh my gosh, Blake Corum in this offense, replacing Kyren Williams. This is awesome. We got to buy. And then it doesn't happen. And then it's okay. And it's radio silence. And then it's Blake Corum next year. Let's do it again. And then you get handed this little card that says Jarquez Hunter in the 4th round, and everyone says, "Oh, who's Blake Corum?" It's Jarquez Hunter, the guy who didn't break out in Auburn until maybe his senior year, if he ever technically did. It's this guy, actually, that's Sean McVay's chosen one. He tried Blake Corum. He didn't like Blake Corum. What are we doing? Are we so depraved for content that we have to be pumping up guys like Jarquez Hunter over Blake Corum? For what? What is Jarquez Hunter going to do that Blake Corum couldn't do last season? Seriously, anybody in the comments that disagrees with me, please answer me that. What does Jarquez Hunter offer that Blake Corum didn't already offer coming into this? Yeah, needless to say, I'm very much in on buying Blake Corum.
Yeah, in his, just for context, because I very sloppily didn't mention this beforehand, ADP of 173 and going in round 15, that just, he's going right next to Alec Ayumanor and Jalen Royals. I would trade Jalen Royals. I like Jalen Royals, but I would trade either one of those two guys for Blake Corum in a heartbeat. So
at that price, there's really no reason to not have 100% rostership of Blake Corum. If you're guaranteed that buying price, there's no reason why you shouldn't have him in all of your leagues.
I agree. Especially if somebody's just done with them for whatever reason. All right, let's move on to your next player, and it's a wide receiver, isn't it?
Yeah, quick state of the union on Rashid Shaheed before I get into it. I cheated. Didn't know I cheated, but I cheated. Dynasty Data Lab said 25.8. That didn't seem right, but I went with it.
Mm-hmm.
And he is actually 26.8. He's about to turn 27. Further, it's also cheating because August 31st is his birthday, and he would have been 26 before the season started. So I'll take the L on that one, as I usually do about every other episode. I got to do a State of the Union and take an L. But I still think Rashid Shaheed is worthwhile where he's going in drafts, because primarily I'm seeing a lot of Chris Olave love this offseason. And to be honest, Seth, I do not get it. I don't get it
either.
And it's nothing really against him as a talent. I see the talent in Chris Olave, but we've also seen his struggles to perform, especially when there's a struggle behind center. Not even one-time All-Pro Derek Carr was able to provide him with sustainable production. And we're going to expect this to change with Tyler Shook or Spencer Rattler. Like, get out of here. These bad quarterbacks do not mesh with possession X receivers. It's why Drake London shat the bed until he got somebody who could throw him the ball. It's why Garrett Wilson struggles. It's why Michael Pittman struggles unless he has a quarterback capable of meshing with that. It's not a talent issue. It's a role and scheme fit issue. Now, enter Rashid Shaheed, the guy who last year put up 2.17 yards per route run, 27th among receivers, 26th in target share, 5.6% higher of a target share compared to Chris Olave was Rashid Shaheed, the lead dog in that offense when he was healthy. 25.5, number 23 amongst receivers in targets per route run. Led receivers in air yard share, was 14th in dominator rating, which is a percentage per player profiler of the team's yards and touchdowns. And then 21st in yards per team pass attempt, which shows how much the team relied on you to move the ball through the air. And he ranked 21st among receivers. His profile matches up much better to a bad quarterback, as he works mainly from the slot and is more adept at creating separation. And working closer to the line of scrimmage will likely mean more targets because of that. And further, being more adept at separating downfield will likely yield more deep targets going to Shaheed instead of Olave because of not having to throw into a tight window. The margin for error is going to be larger because Shaheed's a burner. So for all these reasons, even though I messed up, technically Dynasty Data Lab that messed up. They're not a sponsor, so I can throw them under the bus. Technically not 25, but definitely a sleeper.
Yeah, no, he was more effective than Chris Olave was last year. And according to Dynasty Data Lab, Chris Olave is currently going at the back of round 6 in Superflex startups at pick 72 overall. Just for context, that's close to Caleb Johnson, RJ Harvey, DJ Moore, Jordan Addison, and Emeka Egbuka. He's going ahead of Emeka Egbuka. I kind of thought that was crazy. And Rashid Shaheed is not going until round 13, right next to the aforementioned Tyler Shuck, K-Dot, and Kyle Williams. Like, to me, the value is just, that's insane. There's no reason why there should be that much difference between those two wide receivers. If you want to rank Chris Olave ahead of Rashid Shaheed, okay, fine. Almost actually 7 rounds ahead of him when Rashid Shaheed was better last year than Chris Olave with Derek Carr playing quarterback. Okay. The one criticism I think you're going to get is probably the situation is not great, but you touched on that. And this season could just be dreadful for the Saints and all of their skill position players. So I would say probably, to use the old cliche, better in best ball is what Rashid Shaheed is right now. So you don't have to figure out when to put him in your lineup. But I am on your side. I'm just saying, I think those concerns are valid.
Yeah, I think the average Dynasty roster is deep enough too to where some of that better for best ball goes away. Like, if you're in leagues that we play in, like, we have multiple flexes and 3 receiver spots. So you then start making lineup decisions of like Rashid Shaheed versus, enter a lot of these names that are around this range that we're going in. But yes, I definitely see that as a criticism.
My next player is another running back. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure why he's ranked this low. And you can see a theme throughout all of my picks. It's second-year players, third-year players. And this is MarShawn Lloyd. And according to Dynasty Data Lab, he is player number 198 off the board. And with the Green Bay Packers backup running back situation over the past 3 seasons, there's always been a built-in floor, whether it was A.J. Dillon or last year it was Emmanuel Wilson, who actually rushed for 500 yards, had 14 targets, over 100 carries. And currently, the depth chart sits with Josh Jacobs, obviously at the top. Then it's MarShawn Lloyd, who they took in round 3 last year. And I remember at the time, there were some people, I'm not saying that I'm one of them, that said, oh, this is clearly the heir apparent, for the Packers in their running back room. And as you might be able to see, in this offseason, the Packers did not add a running back of note in the draft that was stacked at that position. And so this tells me that they feel confident that MarShawn Lloyd can hold down that RB2 spot. And if anything happens to Josh Jacobs, you're talking MarShawn Lloyd could be a potential league winner type of player, and getting him as a 23-year-old running back at pick 198 in a dynasty startup, I don't think he's going to go that late, just to be honest with you. Like, as we get into July and further into the summer, obviously that if you're doing a startup in August, you're kind of playing with fire a little bit. But to me, this is just a smash, because as much as I do not like the Packers, their running back usage throughout the last 3 years with Matt LaFleur suggests he's gonna get 100 carries, just like Emmanuel Wilson got last year. They're not gonna use Josh Jacobs the way the Rams use Kyron Williams. Josh Jacobs is gonna sit somewhere in the 60% range, and that's gonna give MarShawn Lloyd some run as the backup running back. And then you have the contingent upside of, God, if anything happens to Josh Jacobs, it's wheels up, baby. So I'm all in on MarShawn Lloyd, and another guy I want 100% rostership of in all formats.
Yeah, I don't have much to add there. It's the same thesis with the year 2 running backs of, we called, how is it the second time in this dude's career that we've labeled Josh Jacobs dead? I mean, not me personally, not you personally, but like, how do we go through this twice in Vegas and then again in Green Bay where we just labeled him dust? And it just wasn't the case. But Lloyd, again, these things tend to change after year one, particularly as you know, when the front office doesn't make any significant moves in the backfield.
All right, let's move on to your next player, a Browns wide receiver by the name of Cedric Tillman. So tell us about Cedric Tillman.
Yeah, quickly, because again, to address the comment I'll get from the Saints and the comment I'll get about the Browns, the bad offense. I don't care. I don't care. I don't. Because what does a bad offense mean, Seth?
I mean,
you
there's
lose a
still
lot
going
of
to
games.
score.
What happens when you lose a lot of games?
You're in negative game scripts.
You throw the ball a lot, don't you? You get a lot of garbage time, don't you? Because you're down 20 points.
Yep.
Well, that's what happens. And even the worst offenses are still going to be throwing enough unless they're, hell-bent on running the ball. They're still going to be throwing enough to have healthy target shares for people around him. And it's not like we're making these comments about a Jerry Jeudy who's multiple rounds more expensive than Cedric Tillman. But we're talking about a 14th round, end of the 14th round pick here in Cedric Tillman and a mid to late 13th round pick in Shaheed. So after the breakout, or I don't know if he already broke out technically, of Jerry Jeudy, Tillman's now being overlooked, and primarily because what do we always talk about? Getting injured when it matters most in the fantasy playoffs as the season winds down puts a negative perception on you, because Jerry Jeudy was scoring points in the fantasy championship week. Cedric Tillman was not. But Joe Flacco, I talked also about possession X receivers and how not all quarterbacks mesh with that. Joe Flacco is actually somebody who meshes very well with possession X receivers, and that's what Cedric Tillman is. And this is evidenced by Pittman's 14.6 fantasy points per game with Flacco under center last season, including a 2.4 point performance with only a 77% snap share. Couldn't find any news on it. It was against Minnesota. I'm almost positive he left that game. I thought he had a concussion scare at some point last season, and I think it might have been that game, but maybe I'm off. Regardless, 15 fantasy points per game with Flacco starting. And then we all remember the fantasy explosion of Amari Cooper in the back half of 2023, where he averaged 10.5 targets a game. He was the wide receiver 4 in fantasy points per game in that stretch, and accumulated 39% of his total yardage of the season in that 4-week stretch. Joe Flacco, very good for possession X receivers. Joe Flacco will be very good for Cedric Tillman. There's no competition for this role within the offense, and I expect around a 20% target share for Tillman this season. And no matter what team he plays for, that volume will beat his current ADP.
Yeah, and it's hard to argue. He's just 25 years old, and this is a team that needs to figure out what they have. And Cedric Tillman's one of those players that they need to figure out. Is he going to be a part of our future, or is he not? I've heard some arguments for Deontay Johnson, who I know is older and doesn't fit this criteria of being a potential sleeper pick, but I mean, I suppose so. I suppose Deontay Johnson could have some value, but if all things are equal here, I mean, these players are around the same. Maybe Cedric Tillman's a little bit higher, cost wise, but I'm going with the upside of Cedric Tillman here. So you said Joe Flacco, but there's also, I think, some quarterback fail safes, and we'll talk about one of those quarterbacks that could, make a bleak situation a little bit better if they're good. And I'll tease that for now. We'll talk about one of the rookie quarterbacks. Hint, hint, his name is not Shedeur Sanders. But I'm going to talk about one of the strangest wide receivers seasons that I've seen in quite some time, and that's Wan'Dale Robinson. And my first question when I was looking at this list was, I mean, he kind of has to have a 20% target share in this offense, right? I mean, who else is going to
Slayton
take
as
targets?
The burner, but it makes more sense for that to be Robinson than anybody else, just given the role.
Yeah, because he's going to be in the slot. He ranked number 2 in slot snaps amongst wide receivers last year. That's where he's going to be with Slayton on the outside, and obviously they have Malik Neighbors. So the Giants are their quarterback situation is, in my opinion, leaps and bounds better than what it was last year with Russell Wilson, Jameis, and Jackson Dart versus Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, and Tommy DeVito and Tim Boyle. I mean, that to me is a lot better, and you have some outs too. And we know Jameis Winston is like nirvana for wide receivers. The rest of the wide receiver depth chart, Matt, it's Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, Zach Pascal, Jalen Hyatt, Amir Smith-Marset, and it's not like they have a tight end either. Theo Johnson, Daniel Bellinger, not exactly world beaters. Last season, he ranked number 10 amongst wide receivers in targets with 140 targets. The problem was he ranked number 106 amongst wide receivers in average depth of target at 4.8, which left his average, his yards per reception number, the lowest of his career at 7.5. He's not really a touchdown guy, but in those PPR leagues, he's going to be running those shorter routes. And we know while Russell Wilson does love to throw the ball deep, which I think is going to be really good for Malik Neighbors, there's going to have to be a second option in the offense. And I think very clearly it's Wan'Dale Robinson. And he's 24 years old. And the price is just dirt cheap at 176 is ADP, according to Dynasty Data Lab. So for all those reasons and more, I mean, I'm kind of asking myself the question, why wouldn't I go out and target Wan'Dale Robinson? Because the Giants basically told you with their moves in the offseason that, we're good with our wide receiver room. They could have signed somebody. They could have traded for somebody. They could have drafted somebody. They didn't do it. So Wan'Dale Robinson is the number 2 wide receiver for the Giants, even though he is a very strange, perplexing type player who might just hang out in the slot or hang out just over the middle of the field in the short area and run drag routes, but at 5'8", 179 pounds. But in those PPR leagues, I think there's some real value to be had here.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's sure we're not going to expect the same type of peppering that we got from Daniel Jones, but he's certainly adept at creating separation, right? And working from that slot friendly role. So it's pretty easy to still see a world where he gets to 100, 110 targets even. And if he can put together what we started to see early on in his career, where it looked like it was real palpable production that he was putting together in that first 4 games before he got hurt to start his career, then this could be really promising. And like you mentioned, it's a combination of the cost and the opportunity here. And it doesn't have to be really deeper than that.
Yeah, and sticking with a theme here, your next player is another year 2 running back in a situation that is really, really nice. So tell us about Jaylen Wright.
So the Jonnu Smith trade was actually very good for Jaylen Wright. Why? It means more touches for Devon Etienne. Whoa, record scratch. Matt, how is more touches for Etienne good for Jaylen Wright? I'm glad you asked. Because an even higher utilization rate this season for Etienne means a bigger need for periodic spells. Now, the Dolphins have been killed by injuries time after time during Mike McDaniel's tenure, and his seat's getting warmer and warmer. They have to stay healthy and perform this season, which means keeping Etienne as fresh as possible. Now, last season, who did that job mainly? Well, it's kind of a combination of people. There's mainly Mostert, and there was some Jaylen Wright, and I think with injuries, there might have been some Jeff Wilson in there, and it was tough to draw conclusions because of that. But even just last year, Mostert's game logs, 3 games of 10-plus carries, 4 games of 3-plus targets, 7 games with at least 1 red zone carry. So there's palpable opportunity there. Mind you, that's on a 27% opportunity share. So pretty low. Wright was at about 18%, something like that. So we go back a year prior, and we see the other end of the extreme, right? When Raheem Mostert was the RB4 in fantasy points per game, couldn't stop scoring touchdowns. And now Mostert is gone. Insert Jaylen Wright. No. Do not insert Alexander Mattison. If you're doing that, start over. You did something wrong somewhere. Because when you look at the money on that contract, again, this is more of a depth thing than it is, we want Alexander Mattison to compete with our 3rd round pick, Jaylen Wright. No. If that's his competition, consider me happy because he's going to win that battle 9 times out of 10. The Dolphins coaching staff has already been outspoken about Jaylen Wright handling more of the load this season, which is obvious with the absence of Mostert, but it's still worth noting. So again, just following on theme here, year 2 running backs with really good situations. This is a little bit different because Etienne is a younger incumbent starting running back, but a much lighter, a much more fragile incumbent starting running back than the likes of Kyron Williams, Josh Jacobs, and James Conner.
Yeah, I like this quite a bit. I mean, all you have to do is go to the player profiler player page and just look at his measurables and his burst and his speed. And I mean, he's on paper, Jaylen Wright at 5'11", 210 pounds, runs a 4.38 840, should be everything that Mike McDaniel wants in a running back, and would be the player with the juice that could take over that Devon Etienne role or fill in as best as he possibly could for Devon Etienne in his absence. And this is a player that's still just 22 years old. So likely last year he didn't play that much, probably because, he's a rookie learning the NFL. It doesn't always happen right away for a lot of these rookies. And, he was taken in round 4, but again, outside of adding Raheem Mostert, which that's kind of at this point, or not, what is it, Raheem Mostert or Alexander Mattison? Raheem Mostert used to play for the Dolphins. Outside of adding Alexander Mattison and drafting Ollie Gordon in round 6, they didn't really do much to improve their running back room or to add to that number 2 spot. So again, you would think he figures to be the guy. And if he's the guy at 22 years old at this value, I'm in. And I wish I could disagree more. And I don't think we're going to, honestly. Spoiler alert. Maybe we will with this one. I don't know, because my next player is a wide receiver, and it's shameful that he doesn't have a player picture on PFF. Shame on you, PFF. But it's Jalen Coker. Jalen Coker only had 46 targets last year, but towards the end of the year, starting in week 10, he started to see the field a lot more. We're talking about significantly more. We're talking 80%, 90% snap shares. Now, the depth chart is a little bit more crowded because of Teteroa McMillan, but it isn't anything crazy. It's Teteroa McMillan, Xavier Legette, Adam Thielen, Jalen Coker, David Moore, Jimmy Horn Jr., and I could see him taking that Adam Thielen role in the offense eventually. I would even argue that the Panthers, that's probably what they want to happen this year, is they want to kind of phase Adam Thielen out as he gets older and phase Jalen Coker in. And Jalen Coker is just 23 years old with an athletic profile that's very impressive. And if we're going to project a Bryce Young breakout, why not think that Jalen Coker, Teteroa McMillan, some of these younger wide receivers, maybe even Xavier Legette, are going to be the beneficiaries of that breakout. So Jalen Coker for me is a wide receiver target, and I think you could get thrown into deals, very inexpensive player to go out and acquire. His ADP right now is 170 according to Dynasty Data Lab. So I'm all in on adding Jalen Coker this offseason. How do you feel about Jalen Coker?
I love it. You called me a cokehead because I'm in. I wasn't in last year, like during the season. I wasn't ready to get rid of. That's what they're called. That's what we're called. We're called cokeheads.
We're the cokeheads. Nice.
I did not make up that term. I can't remember who did. Honestly, now I feel bad. I didn't expect.
Man, was it Debro or somebody like that?
It's someone in that realm. But there's a lot of cokeheads out there. I think Matt Harmon's a cokehead.
Yeah.
He's not. He's also not the one who said it. I'm not being helpful in continuing to tell you how many people did make up that same.
We may or may not have to clip that for future use. Matt Harmon is a cokehead, but continue.
Well, I said I'm a cokehead too, and you've already gone on telling the audience I do drugs and stuff like that. But anyway,
you told the audience you do drugs, but
back
anyway,
on course here. He was wide receiver 48 from weeks 8 through 18 and sporadically going up and above 50% snap or 50% snap share. And even with Thielen being the wide receiver 17 over that stretch, Coker was still performing well. And that mark is wide receiver 48. That is way higher than what his ADP currently is. And you would think that would match up at least a little bit better. But then you look at some of the game logs starting in week 8, he had 70% of the snaps, 18 fantasy points, 78 yards and a touchdown. He had 90% of the snaps in week 10, but only had, 7 fantasy points. He had 87 in week 15 snap share. He had 21 points, 110 yards and a touchdown. So he started playing more, but the production was up and down. There's a lot of promise there. There's not a lot of guys who have 18-point and 21-point game logs in the NFL at the receiver position at that price.
Yeah. I think he's very undervalued. And we're going to talk about a couple rookie quarterbacks next, but we're going to talk about yours first. And that would be Jalen Milroe. So talk to me about, because I actually like this. I've come around on Jalen Milroe. I'm not the biggest fan of the prospect, and I don't want to steal any of your thunder, but what are the odds that Sam Darnold plays all 17 games for the Seahawks? I mean, come on.
Yeah, I mean, there's a decent chance, but not with the way the Seahawks performed last year. Right, you draft Jalen Milroe in the 3rd round, basically the QB3, because let's be honest, no one else besides the Saints were drafting Tyler Shuck that high. It just wasn't happening. And basically the QB3, Jalen Milroe for Seattle. They bring in Darnold. They trade DK Metcalf. They let Lockett go. They do bring in Kupp, but at what age, So there's going to be a really short leash here for Sam Darnold. You're going to make this work. Or if we're bad, even if Darnold's playing well, if they're bad, Milroe's going to get some run at some point towards the end of the season. And you even said the same thing to me with Drake May. Why would Drake May play, if they have another person there and they're bad? It doesn't matter. I don't even necessarily disagree with the logic of just letting them sit and learn, but it's not how it works. Ownership gets tired. Rookies get put out there. This is how the NFL works. But we've laid out the fact that Seattle has a plan, and the rushing upside for me is really everything. I didn't love Jalen Hurts as a quarterback prospect. And again, I want to make it very clear. I'm not comparing Hurts to Milroe as a prospect in any sense of the fashion, but I didn't like Lamar Jackson that much as a passer coming out. But I knew when he got to the NFL, he would be a stud because of his dual threat ability and the fact that I know that I'm not very good at judging arm talent. And then same thing with Jalen Hurts. When I watched him in college, I didn't love it. But when he got to the NFL, I knew he was going to be a stud. I don't know Jalen Milroe is going to be a stud, but I have a feeling this might apply to him. It didn't apply to like the Malik Willis's, but I think the rushing upside with Milroe, a guy who's put up over 700 rushing yards multiple times in his career and is 1 inch taller and basically the same weight as Jalen Hurts. So basically the same frame as Jalen Hurts. I'm sure the strength isn't anywhere close to the same compared to Hurts, but we have a guy who's running 90th percentile speed as a quarterback, has that frame, that big body durable frame that Hurts does, and is going to be in an offense with 2 slot separators in JSN and Kupp, so friendly target support there. He has a hyper-effective pass-catching back in Kenneth Walker. He has a sustainable backup running back in Zach Charbonnet, and he has a promising young tight end in Elijah Arroyo. And he's also with Clint Kubiak, who's also had success running some modern offenses and putting up fantasy points for a coordinator who ran 35 pass plays per game last year and the 10th highest pace of play among all teams in New Orleans. So there's a lot of upside to Jalen Milroe, and we talk about it all the time in Superflex leagues. Like, if you're not taking a shot on Jalen Milroe at that price at a Superflex league, to be honest, I don't get it.
Yeah, I'm completely on board. You said it very well. And now I might have to rant a little bit because this is our guy, or at least my guy, Dillon Gabriel. He is currently being drafted in the 18th round, pick 215. And let me just pose the question to you. Let me pose the question to the chat, the audience. Wouldn't it behoove the Cleveland Browns, because they traded back in the first round of the NFL draft, got a boatload of picks for next year. Wouldn't it behoove them to figure out what they have in one of these rookies, whether it be Dillon Gabriel or Shedeur Sanders?
It would behoove.
Right? It would behoove, yes. So my opinion, and clearly the Cleveland Browns' opinion, is that Dillon Gabriel is better than Shedeur Sanders because they drafted him 2 rounds ahead of where they drafted Shedeur Sanders. And if I have my tinfoil hat on, I almost think that Jimmy Haslam, who was in the draft room, was sitting there tapping his fingers on the table as Shedeur Sanders continued to fall. And he got antsy and said, okay, we got to take this guy. We got to take this guy, even though it makes no sense for us to take this guy because we have Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dillon Gabriel. We have Deshaun Watson, whose contract is going to eat our entire team alive. And now we're going to add a 5th quarterback to this quarterback bizarro weirdness mesh of whatever kind of crap this is that you call a quarterback room. And it made no sense. And what makes no sense too, additionally, is the fact that Shedeur Sanders is getting drafted 5 rounds ahead of Dillon Gabriel in round 13 of a dynasty startup. That's preposterous because the rookie quarterback that they should at least give some opportunity to is the quarterback that they took before Shedeur Sanders, and that would be Dillon Gabriel, because he was better in college. Go look at the stats for a longer stretch of time. Dillon Gabriel played for big-time programs like Oregon, Oklahoma, UCF, and basically since 2019, he was putting up 3,000 passing yards and 25 or 30 touchdowns with few interceptions. And oh, by the way, he can run a little bit too. So I know he's a little bit smaller. He's 6 feet tall, just a hair over 200 pounds. But I mean, God, have we ever seen a small quarterback ever succeed at the NFL level? I mean, it's darn near impossible. I mean, Drew Brees was terrible. I mean, Tua's horrible. I mean, Baker Mayfield couldn't throw a football I don't know what kind of analogy I'm looking for here. Like smaller quarterbacks, and I know those sizes don't exactly match up, but all of those quarterbacks I just mentioned are hovering around 6 feet tall. Okay. So it's possible that Dillon Gabriel's could be a capable starting quarterback. We've seen it before, and the college production at big time schools playing against big time competition would tell me that this was a good shot for them to take in the 3rd round. I would have taken it. Now it was idiotic for them to add the weirdness of Shedeur Sanders to the puzzle, but that's what happened. And there's no way you can convince me that Shedeur Sanders belongs 5 rounds ahead of Dillon Gabriel. So give me Dillon Gabriel or give me death, please.
Yeah, we usually talk about this with like running back rooms or receiver rooms, but again, ambiguous situations. You hit the nail on the head. Joe Flacco is not going to be the starter for the entire season. Somebody else is going to emerge from that. And it's one of the reasons why I'm a little scared of buying Cedric Tillman, because we don't really know. The fact that Joe Flacco is the most secure and inspiring piece there it's not heartwarming, but I believe in the talent of Dillon Gabriel. You believe in the talent of Dillon Gabriel. I was turned on from when you and John Lobb were talking about it. And that's where I was, turned on to paying a little bit more attention to Dillon Gabriel. So quite a few respected minds around me are pro Dillon Gabriel. And again, value, opportunity, that's how we calculate whether it's worth it to take a shot.
Yeah, and shout out to John who alerted me. I mean, he was Dillon Gabriel. I had watched some tape and I had liked what I had seen, but John was the one who really gave me the confidence to go all in on Dillon Gabriel. So shout out to John Lobb. He's the best. And I have a bonus pick because I had to throw a wild card in here, and it's Mason Taylor. And the reason why I threw Mason Taylor in here is, despite how I feel about Justin Fields, there's very limited target competition with the Jets, and Justin Fields did deliver Cole Kmet a nice season once upon a time in 2023. The current depth chart for the Jets is Garrett Wilson, Josh Reynolds, Alan Lazard, Tyler Johnson, Aaron Smith, Malachi Corley at wide receiver, and then Mason Taylor, Jeremy Ruckert, Stone Smart with 2 T's. Somebody named Smart that's spelled wrong is just the very picture of irony. Mason Taylor, I don't think it's crazy to think that he could have a 20% target share in year one. And if that's the case, he's going to, I mean, Cole, you're looking at me sideways, but Cole Kmet had a 19.3% target share in 2023 with DJ Moore on the team. So what are you thinking about Mason Taylor?
I think a 20% target share is wild for a rookie. I mean, 20% target share in any offense, Mason Taylor should be your tight end like 8 or like 8 or 9 by your seasonal rankings. It's certainly what I would call the 5% outlier outcome, but I could see a 15 to 16% target share year one, which is still more significant than I've ever given Mason Taylor credit for. So, I like the call. The only thing I had to say about that was I don't think he's getting to a 20% target share.
All right. We did it. 13 sleepers. Well, 14 if you include DeAndre Swift in about an hour. So any final words of wisdom for the people before we end the show today?
Yeah, I came up with this after talking about Travis Etienne. Tank Bigsby, because the one thing I didn't speak to is people are going to be Tank Bigsby fans. It's ironic that this is happening again. Tank Bigsby is Ronald Jones. And that's what I have to say. Because when you look at the efficiency metrics, Seth, there's no difference really between him and Travis Etienne. But you see the big carries that he had last year. And that was my theory the entire time with Ronald Jones. Like he's getting lucky. He's getting lucky, and these long runs are getting broken for him and not Leonard Fournette. And the fact that the coaching staff continues to go to Leonard Fournette, despite this happening, is telling. There's got to be a reason for that. Now it's projecting a little bit, but I think what's going to happen is this coaching staff will lean on Travis Etienne early. And if he's healthy and playing well, I think he'll continue to be the lead dog. Bigsby might break off some of those runs. He might play goal line like Ronald Jones did, but Etienne's the better running back, and that will prevail.
You heard it from him. You can follow Matt Babich at Babich_Matt10. You can follow me on Twitter at Seth_DIEWOLD. You can follow the show on Twitter at FF Dynasty Table. That's going to do it for us. Nobody cares about Aaron Rodgers because nobody cares. He's going to lead the Steelers to a 7-10 season, and my prediction is just going to get worse and worse every single episode. So stay tuned for that. And until next time, we will see you later. Have a great part of your day. Whatever part of your day you're in, make it a great one, and we will see you later. Bye-bye, everybody.